what I always love is that, and that's probably just my anthropology bit, but it's like, it's all new, but it's also all old. It's like, yeah, living in communities, in actually what community means. Like, the thing about the word community is it's been so co-opted by like the digital world that we now think it means some sort of like, I don't know, network, some sort of forum. But, you know, community, neighborhood, real world streets, where what that should mean, if those communities have been allowed to grow and evolve naturally and organically, and we haven't had the kind of social cleansing or things that mean that communities are like really mono in certain areas, then you should naturally have like diverse communities with intergenerational relationships. You know, it's so funny because like if you think about things that were quite old school but so like sensible, like a laundrette, you know, like the fact that if everybody doesn't have to have their own washing machine, which we know we don't use enough, for example, and you have a place and a space in which you share one, that's a really practical sharing economy thing, right? But it's also a communal thing. It's an excuse. When you share, you have an excuse to get together. So I think from a sharing economy, like purely economic point of view, what we're looking to do is find a way that we can transition to an economy where we produce less stuff, but we extrapolate more value from the stuff that we produce, because we design it to last and we build it to be shared, so that you have that second life, third life, fourth life. But of course, that's not just about the physical economy, it's about the social, cultural economy, isn't it? That we then have a currency, a different kind of currency, because if you're sharing stuff, it brings you more value, more connections, more joy. And that's what I mean about finding solutions that enhance not just the things that we have access to, the spaces, the stuff, the skills, but also enhance our own sense of who we are in connection with other people, because that's what being human is.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with me, Dan Burgess.
Hello, thanks for tuning in. This is Dan. Welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast. It means a lot that you're tuning in and listening with podcasts emerging all over the show where we look these days. This is episode 35, and in this episode, I'm in conversation with Olivia Knight. Now, Liv is a social entrepreneur. She's the founder of collaborative gifting platform Patchwork. She is an activist on sort of multiple dimensions, at a community level in South London where she lives, and also serving multiple kind of social and climate issues. Liv is playing a key role in the development of the kind of sharing economy here in the UK, and she currently is chairing the UK Sharing Economy platform. She's an ex-brand strategist. She was a partner and brand strategist at eatbigfish. She was a former creative director at Do the Green Thing, which is a brilliant climate and environmental creative platform. I've known Liv for some years, and in full disclosure, myself and my partner Seema invested into her Patchwork business when she started up about 6 years ago. Now, Liv is someone with tremendous energy and vision, and a fierce believer in equality, fairness and social justice. And so this conversation was a real delight. It was, again, recorded in early May. So apologies, it's taken a few weeks to get out, but with my neck disc injury, it's taken me a few weeks to get on top of all this. But anyway, I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you do too. Check out Liv's work, check out Patchwork, all will be in the links in the show notes. But let's get to it. This is episode 35 of the Spaceship Earth podcast with Olivia Knight.
We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. How bonkers is that?
So, Liv, welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
Hello, thanks for having me.
That's all right. Good to chat via this new Zencaster thing that I'm dabbling with at the moment.
Yeah, well, I'm really, really pleased not to have to see your face as much as I would love to see your face. But as we were just saying before we went live, the endless house party Zooms and all the rest of it is actually quite nice to have pure audio and to sit and talk to each other without having to look at a screen. So very happy here. Thank you.
I think I was hearing something about people were sort of getting back into kind of old school phone calls and stuff.
Oh my God, I've been on my house phone very, very much. Definitely. Loving it. Very old school. Yeah.
It's brilliant. Bring back the voice.
Yeah.
So thanks, Liv, for agreeing to have a conversation.
No, pleasure.
And I want to obviously dig into kind of lots of stuff. I want to dig into the whole patchwork story and understand, and also just I probably want to give my listeners a little bit of a bit of context or a bit of your story, I guess, because I always like to
Yep.
kind of people like to understand a bit more about how people get to doing what they're doing, and
Yep.
some of that journeying is always really interesting. So I think you know in my head when I think of you, I see you as a social entrepreneur, but I see you as very much as an activist as well,
Yep.
from a kind of social perspective, environmentally, but also very much there's this very strong community. I see a real sort of community activism in you, and the work that you do. You've come from originally like the world of branding and communication, but
Yeah.
you've had that part of you. You've had that journey as well,
Yeah.
and then you've been developing Patchwork for it's quite a few years now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And you're very much at the sort of forefront of the kind of the British the sharing economy, the kind of sharing movements. So you chair that, and
Mhm.
so you've got quite a lot going on in your kind of
Yeah, I have.
your system
Feels
of
like it.
existence. So yeah, so like exactly. So we'll dig into all of that because there's some brilliant stuff, and I'm also really fascinated in how this stuff is responding and in light of what we're all experiencing now, and
Yeah.
particularly where. So we'll dive into all of that. But I mean, I guess I'd love to know a little bit. I'd love to listeners to hear a little bit about a bit about your story, how you're sort of at where you are right now. But maybe we could even just start with a little bit of right now, like how you're feeling in this moment and where you're at, just to give a bit of context.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? And it has been said so much, but I think it's that we can't talk about the experience in one way because so many people are experiencing lockdown and
Mm.
coronavirus in like a multitude of different experiences. And I think certainly me and my husband have been in that position of going, bye, babe. Sorry, that's my son going for a bike ride. Um, yeah, I think me and my husband have been in a position where actually we feel like we've never worked harder. I run my own business, Patchwork, which we'll come on to talk about. He is trying to run a radio station that talks about sport all day when there isn't any sport from our flat in southeast London. The two kids are
Wow.
trying to do schooling. And I think we've almost been like, oh, I wonder what it feels like to be bored, or I wonder what it feels like to play board games because we haven't been doing any of that. So I think, yeah, there's
Yeah.
that element where it's actually felt quite intense and really hard for us work-wise. And also, I think a lot of the media, because it's written, generally by sort of, you know, middle class white people who often are
Yeah.
in a sort of position of relative, like sort of privilege, are
Yeah.
often experiencing a very different thing as well. So I just think a lot of my friends that are, Barney, who's a bus driver, or my cousin Roisin, who's a nurse, or my friend Tam, who's a child psychotherapist, like there are so many people who are on the front line in one way or the other, working in Tesco, whatever they're doing, or supporting people who are vulnerable, who need the kind of care and support at the moment, who are finding this very, very different and not the kind of quiet, pause, reflective time that
Mm.
generally we're speaking about. So it does depend who you are and what you do and how secure you are in terms of your life, your work, your own resources, your community around you. That means that I think the danger is that we start talking about COVID-19 as if it is one experience, because those people who are experiencing it in a way that have access to the majority of the media might be telling a sort of different story. So I think it's really great when you do get to find the different voices and the different stories that are coming to the surface, because I think we'd be wrong to kind of think, oh, isn't it funny us all sitting here twiddling our thumbs, which I hear quite a lot. And I'm like, God, yeah,
Mm.
that's not certainly not true for everybody. But I think one of the common things probably that we all do feel, however hard we're working or, whatever our situation is, that when you do step out of the flat, step into your street, it is quiet. You can hear the birds. There aren't any cars on the road, really, relatively. The clean air, like all that stuff, not seeing or hearing planes in the sky. Hopefully, we are all at least getting that sense of quiet and that sense
Mm.
of pause. And I think that is, as we'll probably come to talk about, really crucial. We need to kind of hold on to that and think about what we want the
Mm.
world to look like when we come out the other side. But yeah, so for me, really glad to be doing audio and not more staring at a screen, given that that's what I do all day. And actually, my husband was asked to take a week off holiday from work before June, before sort of football kicks back in again. And so I decided to take a week off this week. So actually, we've had a holiday at home with the kids. And for the first time, we did play some board games. And, you know, I'm
Woohoo!
planning on doing a jigsaw and all that kind of stuff. So we have had some time together this week, because I almost wanted to kind of get through lockdown and be able to share those stories of like, oh, yeah,
Yeah,
hanging out with the kids was fun, because I felt like up until this point, yeah, it's
it
been
hadn't
pretty
happened.
full on.
Yeah,
Yeah, luckily
it's
they're sort of
yeah,
11, or no, older now. 13, my son is now 13 and 16, so
yeah,
sort of left to their own devices, and he's getting really good at FIFA, so I mean,
yeah. Well,
what can I
yeah,
say?
exactly. There's some deep gaming
Yeah,
learning going on in the
definitely.
world. I mean, it's you know what I've been reflecting a lot on exactly what you were just saying about these different experiences, and in many ways, I wrote a long post actually on Medium last week about this. But in many ways, if you've had sort of 5 or 6 weeks where you've been able to sort of be in your home,
Mm.
and in many ways you have a privilege because do you know what I mean? In
Yeah,
safety, you've able to
yeah, yeah.
remain safely at home, and actually what I'm interested in is what comes with that. Then what comes, because there's a sense with with privilege should come greater responsibility.
Yeah.
So if you've witnessed if what's being revealed during these times,
Mm.
both to all the things you've just spoken to, whether it's the professions
Yeah.
that are keeping this all of us alive and sustained,
Mm.
which we've always tended to see as down the ladder,
Yeah.
whether it's the vast parts of the population who are suffering every day like this,
Yeah.
but actually now it's being revealed even more.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so
Mm.
there's these different reveals that are happening, and I guess because and then there's been the sort of middle class piece that you spoke to as well, and then there's also a little bit of tension there about some saying. So what I've heard other people saying is like, actually sometimes noticing the joy of maybe some people's lives that they've created, and that they're having this moment of joy with their children, and
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
and also you've got to recognize and celebrate that as well, as what's that telling us about,
Yeah.
what's that telling us about, or that they've the joy of being able to eat properly,
Mhm.
or create food together. And so there's
Mhm.
all like you said, there's all these different experiences, and you kind of need to hear all of them, right,
Yeah.
or at least understand that they're all there,
Yeah.
and yeah.
But also, I
Anyway,
think it comes to the thing about choice, because, and I was listening to or I was part of Tortoise Media did a talk with a think-in with Julia Hobsbawm, who's just written a book called Simplicity Principle,
mm,
and which was fascinating, really great, and thinking about exactly that, how people might within this context learn to appreciate, slowing down, pausing, doing those things, whether it is baking bread, cooking with the kids, going for longer walks, all that kind of stuff. And another friend, Rob Poynton's, just wrote a book quite recently called Do
oh
Pause.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I think from an individual perspective, all of those things are really interesting, and it's really useful for us to see how we can apply those things, kind of pause, reflection, simplicity in our own lives. But I think the key thing that came out from me from the thinking, which I raised in the session, was, but it's also about choice. Like one person in the session was saying, I choose to work less and earn less because I want to spend
mm,
more time with my kids. And it's like, yes, because therein lies your power, that you can choose to do that. And I think that's the difference, is that so many people, when we live in a sort of capitalist society that almost depends on promoting insecurity, sort of
mm,
systematic insecurity for people, particularly, and obviously in terms of the labour market, people don't necessarily have the choice to do those things. So yeah, great to be able to, choose to not work, or choose to be with the kids, or choose to homeschool. But if you're trying to juggle a million things because you don't have that choice, then that's when things become really difficult. And of course, what's been amazing to see is that a Conservative government has come in effectively with short-term solutions that are providing the kind of safety net that allows people to make those choices. So if you're now furloughed and you're protected, you can, homeschool your kids. You don't have to be worrying about your income if you feel that you're protected in
yeah,
one way or other, if you qualify for all those different things. And of course, your employment status and all that comes in as well, as another sort of layer of issues. But I think what is really fascinating about this time is that people might start to be moving much more quickly to those ideas that were considered kind of radical about, working less, 4-day weeks, universal basic income, all these ideas around what we can do in terms of politically via the state providing safety nets and a kind of fairer system that allows people to be supported and therefore make their own choices, feel much more like a sort of potential reality, which I think's really interesting. I mean, yeah, we can dig into all of that as well.
Yeah, no,
Sure.
no, absolutely. And I guess one of the I was had a conversation yesterday that was it was a friend who's been talking a lot about actually relationships to money and how and this the stories that we tell ourselves about money in our lives, and but he was also talking about actually like what is so missing for most of us from, and particularly those who in many communities have less of this at all, but is the ability to be able to question life from quite a young age,
totally.
and then B, to have community to listen and hold those questions with them. And these are very two kind of sort of quite sort of simple principles that actually feel again that have been sort of stripped out a little bit of how we go about our
well, of course, because if time is money and we're always scrabbling to look after ourselves, feed the kids, make sure that everything's kind of working, then of course you have much less time to reflect and think and question and wonder how things could be different. And so hopefully this is giving many people, and again obviously different for everybody, but a larger proportion of people, giving them the chance to have those kinds of conversations, questions, reflections, and maybe just daydream a little bit as well, maybe just dare to hope a little bit, which is always nice.
But exactly. But we were sort of thinking like, from an earlier age, if you're increasingly, it feels like the way that we move through a system, let's say like in the UK, the ability to question things, at least it appears to me, and looking at how people have researched and from my own experiences watching my own children, whatever, it feels like a lot of the systems, you don't allow much questioning to go on in a young age about why people, why we live how we live, or why I might be feeling different to what you're telling me, or why this idea you're asking me to learn doesn't really make any sense to me, and then to have that sort of ability to be sort of heard and not judged. And the reason I bring these out, they're very simple things, but it strikes me even when I look at like Patchwork, which we should go into, but it's a very community. It sits in community, doesn't it? Patchwork as an idea, it's very much. I mean, I maybe you should in a set just give a little bit of an explanation of how it works. But I do remember. So I just want to say, like when I remember when you were first, pitching this whole idea, and it was years back. But I remember
6 years. It'll be this year.
That's right. And I remember that phrase you had about it's like a whip round. It's a basic and it just really struck with me, this whole idea of again how people and communities support each other more. And whether so anyway, I'm rambling.
Well, but that is funny. I'm really glad you brought that up, actually, because that ended up being my pitch, because it was my my nan who totally undermined my like really clever, jazzy, whizzy kind of PR-y pitch, because basically I started out saying Patchwork. Okay, so it's a platform that lets friends come together to collectively contribute towards one big gift or experience, right? And I was like, it's a bit like kind of Pinterest meets Kickstarter, because the idea is you can, if your parents and your daughter would like a bike for her 5th birthday, you can literally kind of create a patchwork, so a board. It's obviously better visually than it is on a podcast, Dan, but we'll give it a go.
We'll link out to
so
you've done this for a few times.
Exactly. So you can then show this kind of patchwork of images that represents the bike broken down into its component parts, so your friends and family can come together and they can go, great, I'm going to give 50 quid for a saddle, 20 quid for a wheel, or I'm going to pay £2 for the bell. And as it's evolved, actually, from feedback from our users, when we launched, when I was first pitching, it was all about money. It was funding one big thing piece by piece. Now it's evolved that you can contribute cash or time or skills. So somebody could say, yep, we want a bike for our daughter's birthday. You can fund a piece of it, or you could say, I haven't actually got any cash that I'm able to give, but I will come and teach your daughter to ride her bike in the park for an hour. That could be a gift. So I started out with this kind of pitch, and then my nan just said to me when I was trying to explain it to my nan, "Oh yeah, it's not a new idea, love, it's a whip round." And I was like, okay, cool, thanks, nan. Totally making me feel like that's not quite as exciting and new and revolutionary as I had thought it was. But of course, actually, that's the most fundamental point. That's the thing that's most interesting and useful about it, is that we're not inventing something new. Friends and families and communities and neighbours have always come together to support each other, to chip in, whether it's for a birthday present, a wedding present, whether it's to help somebody in the community from a point of need or just to celebrate them, chipping in to patch the church roof or whatever it is. That's a whip round. We've always done that. It's just that what we're doing with Patchwork is making that experience of contributing money, and as I say, also now time and skills, much more meaningful, much less transactional. So you're not like chucking money in a hat. You are showing people the experience or the gift that you want people to contribute to, and they really get that tangible sense of how they are celebrating and supporting somebody. And it's, it sounds really cliched, like I sound like a Disney character, but it's like we actually make dreams come true. It's amazing. Like, and what you realize is, then to use another cliche from the Beatles, like you really can sort of do so much more when you get a bit of help from your friends. Basically, if everybody chips in what they can afford or contributes what they can, we can really do and create and make amazing things happen. So it's I suppose in some ways you're right, it's totally about community. We're not actually a social enterprise. We are a for-profit business, or at least would like to be for profit one day.
Yeah.
Profit would be good. But it's really around celebratory occasions. So I guess the kind of crux of it is saying what we're enabling people to do is friends and families to come together to celebrate their love for somebody by collectively contributing towards something that's wanted and needed, and not going, I love you, here's a ton of shit you don't need, which is what we've been doing. So coming back to your point about questioning things, it's actually what children do really well, is just ask those really obvious questions that I think we often forget to ask as we kind of become good consumers, if you like, as we're taught to consume things and stop sort of being I don't know, but people that ask the obvious but curious questions. And I do think that was the fundamental thing for me, is why do we, or have we, at least only because it's not forever, but for the last sort of 50 something years, found that the best way to show our love for each other is to buy shit we don't need. I mean, it's just, we spend money we don't have buying things people they don't want, consuming resources 3 times that which the planet can support, and it all ends up in landfill. So it's actually like it makes me angry, and therefore it makes me want to do something better and different and an alternative that is positive, because there's no point just getting angry and saying stop buying stuff. We have to show people a better way, and with Patchwork, it's the basic principle is just saying get one thing that somebody really wants and needs, not 50 things they don't.
And how's that been, that journey? Because that was, I mean, that was still, someone, like yourself, who's sort of been on the sort of the front lines of a lot of these shifts for quite a few years, at least, much the last decade and more, 12 years or whatever. But it's like, you sort of seeing these blank faces quite a lot still around, let's just talking to the converted and the bubble, it's like trying to reach out to more people around some of these, post-consumerist ideas, or valuing the experience like a gifting experience versus saying, well, I've this bit of material I've given to you, and these are obviously there's we're seeing more and more bigger things that are happening around us that are sort of, I think, starting to accelerate people's understanding of why this stuff is better on so many fronts. But it's been a tough journey, right? Because we're trying to rebirth or birth something that's radically different to the current setup.
Yeah.
So what's that been like?
And actually, I thought it was on the podcast with Sophie from Birdsong. I think she made that really good point. It's just so hard to create almost new sort of models where they don't necessarily exist, because you're testing, you're like prototyping in the hope that it's going to work, because actually when you're up against such huge forces, it's really difficult to do something different and make it work commercially in order to prove that it's not just possible, but that it's productive and it's potentially profitable, which, is important if you're going to make a shift, But it's funny because you said at the beginning about like starting in branding, and I think that's it. It sort of taught me a lot, and I suppose there's like almost a parallel journey. It was connected, but that got me to starting Patchwork, and that is, as you said, when I came out of uni, like so many of my peers, we all who had been studying, I was studying like English literature, anthropology, a lot of my mates were like creatives, and we came out of uni and all got sort of sucked into advertising, branding, marketing, that kind of world. And
Early 90s.
yeah, well, late for me. It was probably
Yeah.
like, what was I?
Yeah, mid to
90,
late
yeah, like
90s. Yeah.
99, I think I graduated,
Yeah.
2000.
Yeah.
So um I remember coming out of uni and thinking, this is good. I definitely wasn't interested in it, and I never have been interested actually in like business per se, as in I'm not like, I don't like defining myself almost like as a businesswoman, as if you go out into the world going, I want to do business. I'm only interested in a certain type of business. It's doing a certain type of thing that feels like there's some value and point to it. And I wasn't particularly interested in branding. It was all very new to me. But I think what was interesting for me was that I was interested in language, communication, art, theatre, ritual, all the things that actually make us human, how we communicate with each other, how we kind of perform, how we engage, how we communicate and persuade each other to behave in different ways. And of course, branding is all about that. All of those things go into, branding, marketing, and basically all serve one end, which is capitalism, of course, depends on branding and marketing and advertising to persuade us to this point again to buy stuff that we don't necessarily need. That is the main purpose. It's persuading us to buy more, fly more, consume more stuff. And it's
And of
easy.
course, it makes us happier, of
Oh,
course,
yeah.
doesn't it?
Yeah, massively, much happier. Um, yeah, it makes us feel massively inadequate, too fat, too ugly, too old, not fun enough unless we are buying all the things that we're supposed to buy. And I think, it's not that I enjoyed working in, as I did for a long time, and I worked for an amazing agency actually that's called Eat Big Fish, that specialized in helping challenger brands compete with market leaders. So really brands that were purpose driven and were going up against the kind of status quo in one way or another. But I think ultimately, I and lots of my peers then felt like, hold on, we're sort of on the wrong side here, if you like. And I think it, I could only make that choice. And I'm just saying this because I think this is again important about kind of privilege. I could only make that choice to leave advertising and marketing and do something different when I felt like I'd sufficiently been able to support myself, protect myself. And back then, like, not at all possible. Now I could like get a job coming out of university, work for a couple of years and get a deposit on a flat, so once you can only afford in a way to have your values or to live your values when you are past the point at which you can basically afford to, is what I mean. So I don't think anyone should beat themselves up about working for brands or businesses when you're still trying to just make things actually work. Your own survival is like, your kind of primary thing. But I suppose I got to a point where I thought, and like many people did that I knew, where we were like, hold on, we need to use all this creativity, all this power, all this the art of persuasion, if you like, to persuade people to do things that actually help the planet rather than destroy it. So I joined Do the Green Thing, which was set up by ex agency founder Naresh Ramchandari, who was ex Karmarama, and quite a few of us all sort of joined in order to help to persuade people through art, through creativity, through all of those amazing sort of talents and skills we collectively had, to fly less, buy less, consume less. And I think that's kind of, it was those two things, like knowing how to build a brand, I guess, understanding through Do the Green Thing that yes, when you're trying to persuade people to go through some sort of behavior change, it is important to have panic. Greta Thunberg says, like, don't say don't panic. Like, we do need to panic, but then we need to act. But on the other hand, I think what I learned through that period was also making sure that you can highlight and show the positive alternative. So you're not just boring people or frightening people, but you're saying, look how much better, more beautiful and different things could be if we behave differently. And I think that's probably what is underpinning Patchwork. Is it's not saying stop buying stuff, it's saying if we come together collectively, we can enjoy the things that we really, really want, but cut away all the crap that we don't. So it's not saying to people, no, you can't have that handbag. Yeah, amazing. You can have an amazing handbag if everyone comes together and chips in for one that will last you 10 years because it's been made better. It hasn't used sweatshop labor. You can feel good about the whole process. So it sort of fits into that buy less, buy better, kind of trend, I guess. But I suppose those were the sort of things that informed me with Patchwork. And what I loved about it was I could start a business that wasn't trying to sell anyone anything. Like, that's what I love. We've got hundreds of templates for people to kind of look through, but actually we're just saying, you use the platform in whatever way works for you. We're not the gift police. And that's why I have to kind of have a bit of a side note on the fact that our kind of principles and our purpose are very much environmentally led, but we don't tell people what they can or can't use the platform for. We have templates that inspire people, but we do have people using it to buy their kid an Xbox or to, go on a honeymoon to Mauritius. So it's not as if I'm saying,
don't have like alarm bells
do you know
going
what I
off.
mean? Well, actually, it's funny you say that, because we're thinking about it. What we want to do is, particularly coming out of this and thinking how, because a lot of people do use the platform as an alternative wedding registry, and a lot of people therefore use it to fund honeymoons. And we try to promote honeymoons that are, slow travel and things like that. But again, because you're collecting money globally from friends anywhere to spend how you like, people can spend it how they like. And what do we do? How do we behave as a responsible business that says, these templates, for example, for these honeymoon funds, are, rated a certain 5-star versus this one that's 0. So at least we can inform people of the decisions that they're making when they're using the platform to organize and fund certain things. But it's a challenge for us, definitely, because you want to respect and facilitate the things that people really want and need and be useful, because the worst thing we can do is, buy things we don't want.
It's been fascinating to see how these behaviours shift or evolve, isn't it? Right, post all of this madness at the moment, because from travel to the types of things that we still want to buy versus it feels like there's a lot up in the air. You sort of, as you talked about with the with the wedding experiences, and when did you start to do you have a sense, I guess, of experience over physical products, or how does it work? Do you get a sense things are changing, or
Definitely. So I think, obviously right now for us things are really, really hard, because the majority of our people using Patchwork are using it as an alternative wedding registry, and all the weddings have obviously been cancelled this year. And as a business, we make our money. It's free to use the platform. If you ask people to make and do stuff, it's always free, because that's the kind of behavior we want to just encourage, about contributing time and skills rather than buying people stuff. But if you use the platform to collect funds towards something, we take a 3.6% commission. So obviously it makes more sense from us from a business point of view that we target weddings, because you have more people coming to a wedding, they give bigger gifts, therefore we make more money off a wedding sort of patchwork, as it were. So that's been really, really hard for us now. And it's not that those weddings are cancelled, love is not cancelled, it's just postponed until next year. But it's hard for us as a business to get through to that next year, and also not knowing what next year looks like. Can you only have 10 people at a wedding? Will it be different? I think the thing that's really good and strong about Patchwork in this current climate, kind of corona wise, is that we're a platform that allows people to come together online to kind of give from a distance in order to make something amazing happen in the real world. So we're definitely seeing lots of lockdown birthdays, obviously, lots of Zoom parties where people have all chipped in through Patchwork towards a particular present or experience. So we're definitely having to kind of focus on that as a business more around other occasions. And of course, we've always waived our fee for any charities that use Patchwork. We absolutely, just from a kind of resource and business point of view, focus on celebratory occasions. We're not trying to compete with Just Giving or Virgin or any of those. We're about families and friends and communities, not sort of crowdfunding in the broader sense. But we're definitely seeing more people using Patchwork now, and we had a brilliant kind of campaign, which was a local campaign to us because we're based in Lewisham, southeast London, for Lewisham Hospital, where we raised 6 and a bit £1,000, I think, in the last couple of weeks for food boxes as kind of gifts to Lewisham Hospital staff. So we're already seeing that sort of shift, which is really, really brilliant. But I think even as you said, prior to coronavirus, we're definitely seeing, and it's obviously the types of people that use Patchwork, but I think we're even within that audience, we're seeing absolutely the move towards experiences over stuff. And I think there's a lot of stuff that's packed into that. It's things like millennials who obviously, no matter how hard they're working or how kind of good their job, it's very, very unlikely that people are able to buy their own homes. So we have most of the people that are getting married are still living in rental accommodation. That means you've got a smaller flat. You probably don't need loads of stuff. Things are so much cheaper anyway now, and that's obviously one of the big problems, is that because fast fashion, cheap stores enable people to buy glasses and toasters when they need them, people don't need to wait to get married to get themselves a new set of plates. So we're definitely seeing around weddings, it's all about experiences and not stuff. And I think the things that we're seeing people funding are really, really interesting. So we had a flock of sheep funded as a wedding present about a month ago. We've had several patches of woodland being bought. So you could buy a packet of seeds, or you could buy a tree, or you could buy some earth per square meter.
Wow.
Joint tattoos is quite a popular one for Patchwork. Things that are basically expensive, you can't buy in a department store, and one person couldn't buy you, I suppose.
And it feels like there is I guess this meaning. There seems to be something around more meaningful,
definitely,
kind of things that are popping up, and that's interesting as well, isn't it? As we sort of looking at how the search for meaning that continues.
Definitely. Well, it's funny because I don't know if I ever said this to you, but the reason I called it Patchwork, partly because of this whole piece by piece, coming together collectively, but actually way, way, way back, the first wedding gift we ever gave, disgracefully, obviously, was the woman. I mean, that was what a wedding was. You were sort of giving your daughter away as a gift to a family as a part of a trade. And then that sort of evolved in terms of like a kind of idea of a dowry, but originally wedding gifts were effectively a way of bringing families together. And it was only really sort of the idea of a physical gift that the couple got to enjoy themselves sort of emerged around, I think it was sort of late 17th century, where they were given a patchwork, like literally a patchwork quilt. And that quilt was made up of the available scraps that the family had to spare from whatever fabric they had laying around. And it was given to the mother, who would then sew these patches all together to create a quilt that obviously represented their love and their union, because it went on their wedding bed. But it was that idea of people coming together, using what available resource you have to create something that's beautiful, unique, useful, and lasting, and that inherently has all of that meaning, all of those memories, all of those people like bound within that physical gift. And I think people are definitely looking for things that have meaning and an excuse to bring their people together in a way that they can all sort of tangibly feel. So stories of people going with their wedding guests to visit patches of woodland every year is a lovely idea. Looking down at your tattoo and knowing your whole family helped you have it is kind of fun and meaningful and more lasting than some plates or crockery or whatever that actually 50 years ago they might have lasted a lifetime. But the idea of someone buying you that kind of gift for your wedding, when those kinds of products now aren't built to last and the glass will break within the next 6 months, is all just feels very disposable. So I think we are seeing that shift, definitely.
And how does I'm interested in this sort of gifting culture when we think of gifting beyond the kind of material or beyond money, and we start to look at things like the gifting of time or assets or things that we can share more, or gifting of even knowledge, experience, skills, these kind of things. Like how I mean, obviously, again, and all this stuff's been bubbling up, right, for some time, but it sort of feels like, again, like what is going to come out of this massive shake-up that we're experiencing? And are these types of ideas, which have been sort of, being kind of prototyped for years in communities and through different platforms and whatever, do you sense that things like
gifting and sharing are going to become much bigger parts of a more sort of hybrid economy, if you like. What's your sense on what's going on?
Yeah, I think it will, and I also think it has to. Like,
Mm.
it has to for our survival. Like, it really, really does. And I'm not
Mm.
even talking about the massive recession that's about to hit us, because of course at the moment people are talking about the crazy corona times we're living in. This is the secure time. This is where we know what's happening, because we understand lockdown, there's rules, we know how to behave. It's coming out of this that's going to be the chaos. And I think the recession that will hit will mean, as often does in recession, that people will need to be more resourceful, will need to be more collective, we will need to share more. And also, much even more importantly, but of course connected, in terms of the climate. Like, the terrible thing is that, of course, what we've discovered now through corona is that it is, of course, possible to act incredibly decisively when there's an emergency, and you can
Right.
get planes out of the sky, and you can get people, as long as you provide a strict sort of set of rules that people understand to be fair, and that people like, what's his name, Neil what's his name, who set up the the recommendation for the government on
The prof.
social yes,
The
isolation,
prof, but we then
was found that his
humiliated
girlfriend
because
came round.
he only helped avoid tens of thousands of people dying, and then he saw his girlfriend quickly and got
Exactly.
vilified. Anyway,
But
yeah,
I think, I think we can, what this has taught us is that whilst governments and businesses have been telling us in these last few years, that those of us who have been out, campaigning and on the streets and, demanding that we do something about climate change now, and that we can't, and it's difficult and it's not possible, and the economy can't cope, and there's not enough money, and business as usual, all that sort of stuff. We now realise that it is absolutely entirely possible to make those kinds of decisions nationally and internationally to change the way we behave in order to avert a disaster. So hopefully we might take some of that and use that going forward.
yeah. It
But
was yeah. Sorry, go on.
no, go on.
No, it's just making me think about this whole thing about there's a lot in all of this, right? But there's what you're talking about in terms of this obviously this need to act more collectively,
Yeah,
taking responsibility, rethinking all of this stuff from resources. The science thing is so interesting to me of what we've experienced in this suddenly like all of us sort of who've been sort of deeply concerned about climate and ecology for all these times of always trying to bring the science
yeah,
into the thing, and obviously it's just this sense of like governments and corporations seemingly sort of choosing which science they want to believe in and which science they
definitely.
don't want to believe in, and
Yeah.
this has been fascinating seeing how quickly scientists have become
Hmm.
like the focus. They've been being
Hmm.
wheeled out by world
Hmm.
leaders. We've got PMs and presidents pointing to the scientists to answer
Mm.
questions, and I've been giggling a bit. I probably shouldn't, but this whole like that like the way that the British government do these like podiums at
Yeah,
5 or whatever it is, those
yeah,
3 podiums,
yeah.
right? And I was just thinking again, what happens post this? Like, can we imagine a sort of climate where you've got like plaque says stay at home, share more, stop buying crap.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God, Dan, that's what we need.
Guided by the climate science.
Definitely.
Protect our planet. You can
Yeah,
imagine these sort of placards along the front.
yeah,
Can we? Because you can't. How can we get this much behind the science
yeah,
for something, and then reject what the
exactly.
ecological and climate science is
Yeah.
telling us?
But and I think you're so right about that. But then of course what we're also hearing is that we're hearing the science. And of course what the science is to the government is different to the science that's being listened to by other governments. And the really important thing when it comes to science is that you have open, transparent, peer-reviewed science that guides decisions, and not private groups
Yes.
of select scientists that you don't really reveal who they are, and you and it's not sufficiently either transparent or independent enough, that because we've heard that Dominic Cummings has been sitting in those SAGE sessions,
Yeah.
So you're right, the government is now using the science as if it would be wonderful if they listened to the science, as you say, for the last 10 years, but it's also about how they're defining science, that
Yeah.
actually there's not, there's the science that suits the plans at the moment,
Yeah.
and I think to have more transparency on all of those opinions and all of the different working and the modeling would be really good for us right now. And it's interesting that they're happy to follow just a few sort of recommendations from some sort of secret scientists, and yet the whole of the scientific community has been warning about climate change with no one, I mean, apart from the odd, obviously absolutely bonkers, wheel them out climate denier. But there's absolute uniformity on what needs to happen about climate change from the science community, and it's still being ignored.
Yeah. I think it was like, I think it was November or December, wasn't it? It was like 11,000 climate and scientists now putting forth this new demand, and you think to yourself, that is the bulk of the leading science, the leading science communities, and it's fascinating, isn't it? And how, like you say, how we've responded to a sort of a what feels like a sort of edited kind of scientific view of not quite sure who or what, but we've wheeled out science to be at the forefront because of and so I'm
and that's
really
great, and it
intrigued.
should be from now on. But yes, one that is open and transparent. And so to your point about like sharing, I think obviously the Patchwork is absolutely like part of the sharing economy, and that's the reason that Patchwork isn't just a member of SEUK, which is the sharing economy UK trade body that represents sharing economy businesses that allow people to trade their space or their skills or their stuff. So we're a member, and I'm also was elected to the board, and then as of the last year I've been chair of SEUK. And I think
and what's the mission of all of that?
Well, it's a very simple mission. It's a very diverse group of businesses that we represent. So across a number of different sectors, but I guess so it's things like companies like Patchwork, like Her fashion rental platform. So a lot of startups, SMEs, but also the big guys like Airbnb is a member, Gumtree is a member. So the platforms themselves can be very different in terms of the products and the services that they provide. I guess the one thing that we all have in common is that all of the sharing economy businesses are about empowering people to utilize existing resource and therefore reduce waste. So whether it's your skills, your space, or your stuff, if we're sharing it, then obviously we are pooling resources and we are reducing demand for newness because we're using what is already out there and existing. So I guess we're quite a broad membership. It's quite a small trade body, compared to something like the CBI, but we are affiliated to the CBI. And at the moment, it's actually quite tough in the short term because whilst we're all digital businesses, and all obviously platform businesses, it's almost like, oh great, the assumption has been that the high street and physical bricks and mortar companies or businesses, cafes, restaurants, retailers have been affected, but if you're online you're somehow kind of immune. I think is almost like the sort of overall headline is that digital business is doing quite well because people are ordering stuff from home. With the sharing economy, although the platforms are all online, we're actually about connecting people in the real world. So if you're using Gumtree to buy secondhand, I don't know, bike, to come back to the bike again, you're paying for it online, but you're having to go to somebody's house to pick it up. So we have definitely seen that there's been real challenges, and the same for Airbnb with people not being able to travel. Of course, that's a major issue, and probably like a relatively, we don't know, sort of short term in terms of like the Airbnb are saying that from a local perspective, they're expecting people to still travel within their own countries, but obviously it's going to be much more difficult traveling abroad, and there'll be pros and cons for the environment from that point of view. Pros, but cons for lots of businesses, obviously, like Airbnb. But the other thing is the kind of perception about staying in somebody's home. The idea that a whole millennial generation that have rejected kind of corporate, bland, chain hotels in favor of a kind of local human experience where they can stay in somebody else's house and explore a kind of local culture, but also understand people better, I think, from kind of sharing the homes that we have and sort of swapping and sharing. That's going to be really challenged just because of people's sense of I want something clinical and cold, and a hotel room with a sort of hand sanitizer and some free shampoo might seem more appealing, and I think actually there's no reason why we shouldn't be receiving things secondhand in the post from eBay or Gumtree. It's no different in terms of the spread of coronavirus for something being sent online that's being packed by somebody, but that sort of perception of secondhand stuff, of sharing, of making contact with strangers, culturally, I think that's going to be really difficult for a while. Things like car sharing platforms that are absolutely brilliant from an environmental point of view, where of course the objective is to have public transport, which, you know, should be connecting up cities and villages through public transport and trains and buses over airports and over cars. But where your people are living in villages where people are driving, you know, one car because their own car, the idea that you can have pools, carpools and sharing cars and having 4 people using one car rather than 4 different cars on the road is really important as we kind of go forward. And actually we need to get 30 million cars off the road by 2030. So, you know, the sharing economy is one way that we can help to reduce that. So I think, you know, you've seen good stories like Olio, the food app, with people wanting to share more food that they're not eating within their local communities. So people who were finding it hard to access food. But then on the other hand, you've got that sort of resistance of even going to people's doorsteps, and that fear about the proximity to people is obviously difficult. I mean, there was a conversation, there was a meeting with Bayes, and one of the journalists asked, you know, is the sharing economy going to be dead for good, you know, after coronavirus for this very reason? And I think it's the opposite. I feel like the sharing economy is not a new disruptive economy. It's the oldest economy in the world. Before we had this thing called money, it's what we did. We traded our stuff with each other. We bartered, we swapped, we, you know, that's all we've ever done really before we had money. And I think it's kind of the only economy that kids understand. You know, this it's what we do. It's we share, we swap, we barter, we trade stuff in the playground. We get it. And I think in a way it's the economy that will survive this crazy economy that we've got now, but it's going to be hard, I think, in the short term. Yeah.
And it's making me think a lot about like how we might expand our concept of a sharing economy. So, for example, you know what you're talking to there, but what happens if, you know, we're seeing glimpses of this through, you know, the situation that we're in, but, you know, streets are finally being truly shared, right? Because
Oh my
we've cut
God, yeah.
cars out of them, right?
Definitely.
So people are out, people are playing, people are walking, people are noticing stuff, right? There's all this land, right, that we could be ownership, that we could be sharing for people to start growing food, for example, or all these empty shop spaces that we could just be opening up, you know, free or whatever, to share to kids and communities to actually start doing things, you know. So we could be sort of sharing, you know, a lot. You know, I think the whole idea. I'm kind of interested in this sort of radical sharing economy, which is sort of, it's not just assets and how, because that feels like, you know, that idea, this idea now of sort of sharing much more radically what we have, access, skills, technologies, information, right? If we just share information better, let it just go, you know.
No, and I think you're right with even on a really practical level. Like we're already seeing like Sadiq Khan this week talking with all the other like mayors of cities across the world, talking about how to use the opportunity to develop the cycling superhighways, as you say, like widening pavements in order to allow people to socially distance at 2 meters. But how brilliant to narrow roads, widen pavements makes, you know, cycling much easier and safer around our cities. The other thing I think it's been really amazing is like all of this time where the government has said, you know, oh, it's really difficult to do anything about homelessness. Well, as soon as Corona hit, all of those, I mean, the majority, as far as I understand it, and I work with and support a couple of homeless charities, you know, homeless people are being housed, yes, in hotels that might otherwise have been used by people who are travelling to London. But we know that there's a huge, ridiculous, obscene amount of unused buildings across the whole of the UK, which, you know, nobody's dared to kind of requisition, if you like. But this idea of radical sharing is absolutely right. If a space is not being used and it can be used by somebody who needs it, why isn't it being used? And why aren't we developing systems that allow that to happen in a way that can make a real difference at scale? And if you think about it, like you're talking about, you know, common spaces, if you go right back to, like, you know, all the stuff we learn at school about the Enclosure Acts and stuff, you know, commons, common ground, we had to take those grounds, we had to make them common for all of us to have as our kind of collective wealth. And yet in recent years we've seen that our public spaces have actually been privatized. So places that you think are public are often not, you know, they're owned, like around King's Cross are really great examples of all of those spaces that you feel are open to you as the public, and actually they're very much, you know, owned and controlled. And to give us actual genuine access and sharing and opening up the land so that it's used for the common good, and space, as you say, it feels like so obvious, and now is definitely the time, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's as you're talking, it's making me think things like, all this again, for those that have been able to work from home, for example, or who are employed in employment, which enables them to work at home. But like all these office spaces, like what's going to change? Are people going to want to keep servicing or and resourcing all these absurd like commercial spaces?
Totally.
At the same time that we're trying to sort of, pay, we're doing it to pay for the cost of servicing our own living spaces.
Of course.
And then what, what can we not imagine, like some of these spaces being, reconverted into kind of community housing, different types of co-working spaces, much more affordable living spaces for people. I mean, again, it's just, that's what I'm really I'm intrigued by what will happen now with this. I just came off a call with I don't work for too many. I don't have too many corporate clients these days, but the ones I do have are pretty good. And I just came off a call one. It's a big business, very very purposeful. And he was just saying they've all been at home. They're a global business, but he said, but it's radically, and they're a retail business, but it's radically shifted how they're going to think of their office space. And it's just, and how they work. And I've heard lots of conversations with people who, business owners or whatever, who are saying, wow, I mean, I've got 30, 40 staff. I'm like, why am I even, everyone's being able to work better now. We've sort of got our heads around it. Why are we keep resourcing these places and expecting people to go to them all the time? And
no, absolutely. And also, I think this thing, I was listening to a podcast, and I'm now going to forget which one it was because obviously too many.
There's a few out there.
But they were interviewing the founder of Flickr, female founder of Flickr, and I've now forgotten her name as well. I'm very unhelpful, but
back in the day, Flickr.
I know, but she was saying, she was talking about how business, and particularly the whole sort of big business VC landscape is sort of is set up to take people out of their homes, put you in an environment which is entirely controlled, totally intense, often very male dominated, 24/7, and that you prove your success if you can cope in that kind of environment. Right. So it's that kind of idea that we've replicated here at Silicon Roundabout, in Old Street, and that you have to go hard and fast. And if you can't keep up, then, you're out because you must be a failure. And if you want to build a life for yourself alongside your business, then you're a lifestyle business. And that's actually a coded insult because it means you're not serious. And she talked about her ambition, and that she felt like in the future, our collective ambition when we're building businesses should be to go back to that idea of building a business from your home and what that really meant. So she was talking about the reason we have names like, Mr. Smith, or, whatever it is, that you were a blacksmith, or you were, whatever your trade was, and that, or if you were a miller, or if you were a carpenter, or whatever. And she was talking about how families, of course, hundreds of years ago, and for most of our time as humans, would have worked together in their homes as a family. That obviously was really difficult and had different constraints and all the rest of it, labor laws not existing and all those things, child labor and all sorts of stuff. But her basic point was that we should be thinking about business in a way that works with humans, not against them, which should make business more productive anyway, if you can make the people who work with you and for you more happy, more comfortable, and all the rest of it. And I think that will come out from this. I really, really hope. And particularly as we are at Patchwork, there's 5 of us women. We've already been effectively practicing our 4-day working week because we're all, 4 of 5 of us are parents, and all of us effectively work sort of 4 days across the week. And we have had a studio in Brockley, which we've loved, and really sadly have actually just given up the lease on because of coronavirus, and just trying to cut costs that are not people, and as much as I've always felt that even though we've run a digital business and we could do everything remotely, the culture of work is so important, and having all of us sit around the table together and have a face-to-face and be able to communicate and in that way has been really important for me. So I actually am really gutted that we've had to let go of our studio. However, I think you're absolutely right that it's not essential for us, and if it means that we can work better from home, because one of the things we've learned through this crisis is how to do that better through technology, but also through, hopefully, managing our own time, our own mental health, taking walks, doing all those things, then it could benefit us as a company, but hopefully others too. And it was also a brilliant interview on Sam Harris's podcast, where he was talking about the benefits of working virtually means that everybody can light their own candle. So at least you can have a nice smell in your room, and you can eat, stinky Monster Munch crisps and nobody's offended. And you can like wear pants and like a nice smart shirt on top. So there's lots of benefits to working remotely as well, which I'm looking forward to doing now that I won't have to get dressed, that I'm going to be working from home. And like you, I think I'm going to do try and work out at some point if we can afford to put a little space in the garden, because we're in a flat and there's not much room for working when
it's
around,
yeah, these sort of it's going to be so fascinating to see the potential sort of these hybrids that can emerge from this. I was thinking just from I don't know where you sit with like the schooling and everything, but it's even and again obviously I know again some folks are obviously utterly dependent on schools being open and there, and I get all of that again. So I'm speaking from my point of privilege here, but I'm also speaking to like sometimes quite a lot of the time I'm thinking like as I'm sure you do when I look at all exploring all of these issues all the time. You're kind of thinking, well, why do we keep doing the same things? Why do we keep making the same issues? And you've got to look at learning and education as a big piece of the problem, not because of the kids' fault or not because of the teachers' fault, but like who's designing the system? Because ultimately, like, so it's making me think again, like through these experiences for those that have been able to have their kids at home. Of course, it's been super challenging at times, but clearly there's been things that people have seen. Wow, I didn't know. I think as it's gone on, people understand that they let go a bit more. There's less controlling. There's more ability to see that children actually half the time you've got to just let go, not worry. And but I'm interested again in like what hybrids might come out of this. Do you go straight? Again, I mean, this is all systemic, right? Because we're talking about assets and economies and sharing. Why have we got all these schools that have all their own buildings, all their own stuff, getting kids to go there at the same time of day every day, clogging up the streets? All these issues are interconnected, and you kind of think like, and then you bring in the climate ecological thing. How are we going to help kids learn their way into a completely different world that is currently not being catered for by our current system? And so I'm interested in how that might evolve and what those dynamics of place-based learning, community learning, skill sharing, all these kind of things you can start to see. And I wonder at a local level again, where these things might, where again, when cuts are coming and funding is running out, that we've had this chance to sort of prototype, haven't we? I guess, and realize that there are these new ways of doing things. And it was making me think if those parents or people who are looking after children are in a type of work which allows them to work remotely, and we start to see these shifts becoming more normalized, so then what does that say to children if the world is going more remote or flexible, or do you know what I mean, that there's more? Why would you be asking children to go to this place every day? Do you know what I mean? I don't know. It's just it's interesting.
No, and I think there's like, again, there's the physical stuff there, isn't there? And then there's like the approach to it. So I remember when my son came home once and he had some English homework, and it was describe this flat in 3 different ways, and he had to be an estate agent that was selling a property. So you had to fill in the gaps to say the flat has a large living room, and you could say spacious living room, and you could say it had like a nice view or a delightful view or whatever. And I was like, oh my God, his English homework is learning how to be an estate agent. Like, where's his creative writing? Where's his this just sums it up for me, really. Like, what are we doing? Like, and people need houses, and nothing against estate agents per se, but if we're saying to our kids, that's what you're aspiring to, and what we're teaching you in English is how to sell a flat in 3 different ways, I mean, it's totally, in my opinion, absolutely bankrupt. So like, the idea about even if we're talking about how we equip our kids for the future, how do we solve problems? Usually through creativity. How do we communicate? Usually through learning how to share and to be with people. Like, how do we by allowing kids to have much more freedom around learning and the sort of questioning and the conversation and the curiosity, like obviously that would make so much more sense. And then not being, again, not just locked into the type of learning with the tests and the physical building, to be able to get kids out and about and, you know, sort of taking on that role of teaching children all the many sort of variety of things that help us to become good human beings rather than being little kind of like, I don't know, estate agents, I suppose, was
But what
the
you're
fear.
speaking, it's making me think of this again, this sort of more expanded view of sharing, because it's kind of, again, if you look at the sort of these structural things that we're constantly faced with, whether it's pollution, environmental destruction, inequality, the gap between generations, the idea of waste, all these things, they're sort of built in to this way of being and learning in the world,
Definitely.
and it's sort of like to break through that, it sort of feels like the opening up, the connecting different people in communities, the sharing of knowledge, the rethinking of what it is to learn. All these things just feel so key.
Definitely. And also, like, they're all, like you say, what I always love is that, and that's probably just my anthropology bit, but it's like, it's all new, but it's also all old. It's like,
Right.
living in communities, in actually what community means. Like, the thing about the word community is it's been so co-opted by like the digital world that we now think it means some sort of like, I don't know,
Yes.
network, some sort of forum, but, community, neighborhood, real world streets, where what that should mean, if those communities have been allowed to grow and evolve naturally and organically, and we haven't had the kind of social cleansing or things that mean that communities are like really mono in certain areas,
Yeah.
then
They
you
lose
should
the
naturally
diversity.
have like diverse communities with intergenerational relationships. It's so funny because, like, if you think about things that were quite old school but so like sensible, like a laundrette, like the fact that if everybody doesn't have to have their own washing machine, which we know we don't use enough, for example, and you have a place and a space in which you share one, that's a really practical sharing economy thing, right? But it's
Yeah.
also a communal thing. It's an excuse. When you share, you have an excuse to get together. So if, I remember being in Cuba and there was this one guy on the street who had an oven and everyone came to the house to use his oven. And like, yeah, of course it's nice for everyone to have their own oven. But of course, what that meant is that people came together to commune in order to get something done. So I think from a sharing economy, like purely economic point of view, what we're looking to do is find a way that we can transition to an economy where we produce less stuff, but we extrapolate more value from the stuff that we produce because we design it to last and we build it to be shared so that you have that second life, third life, fourth life. And of course, also designing things in terms of a circular economy principles, which is very much connected to the sharing economy, where when something has finally finished its use, you can break it down and you can dispose of it in a way that's sustainable. But of course, that's not just about the physical economy, it's about the social cultural economy, isn't it? That we then have a currency, a different kind of currency, because if you're sharing stuff, it brings you more value, more connections, more joy. And that's what I mean about finding solutions that enhance not just the things that we have access to, the spaces, the stuff, the skills, but also enhance our own sense of who we are in connection with other people, because that's what being human is. And so bringing it back to that idea of gifting, what can we gift, not just in terms of like celebrating your birthday, but what gifts do you have, what skills, what talent, what time do you have available throughout our lives? Sometimes we're cash rich, sometimes we're time poor. I remember at my cousin's wedding, when she was asking people, she used Patchwork to ask people to contribute time and skills instead of stuff, and my nan was like, oh, what can I do? I don't think I've got any skills. And she just said, oh, I'll wash up. And it's like, it doesn't have to be that you know how to play the violin. Everybody has a talent or a skill or some time. And
Yeah.
actually, if we value that over stuff, over money, over the price tag, then I think we'd all find we'd live in a world which would be much more enjoyable. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. It's emerging. We
Mm.
can feel it.
I think so. I think so. And I also
um,
think this fundamentally it's this idea we got lost thinking that, that the economy, this idea of the economy is something that we serve, rather than
yeah,
thinking, no, the economy is something that serves us. We create it. We put it to, you know, and that's how we should be thinking about it. It's almost like we've had this sort of at least 100-year whatever obsession with this thing called money, which is actually a piece of paper that says I owe you. But what do we owe each other? Just this infinite scraps of paper going round and round and round. Our real wealth is obviously it's our planet. Our real wealth is our kids, is each other. And I just think, yeah, if we can really refocus what we mean when we talk about currency, when we talk about an economy, and that it's really, an economy is the thing that supports us as individuals,
Yeah.
collectively as communities. What is that made of? What does that look like? And I love your idea of like, all of the kind of grassroots community stuff that should be the thing that drives us forward. And that's what's always happened. It's always, things don't ever change because the people who have the power decide to hand it down and make a difference. We didn't get the weekend because those in power decided it would be nice to have. It was really hard fought, same as civil rights, human rights, women's rights. Like, all of these things are fought for and designed by and demanded by people, at a very grassroots level on the
Yeah.
streets. And that's what brings about change. So I think the thing I probably fear coming out of this is, what I don't want is that Cameron attitude of the big society, which is, we're about to go in a recession. You've all been doing really great. Community's great. Now you go out and run your schools, and you go out and look after your old people, because actually we have a perfect system called taxation that, if we all put into that, allows us to pay nurses and carers and teachers properly to do those things. So I'm definitely not saying that the sharing economy should be people filling a gap that I feel that the state should be there to support. I think that's probably the danger. But I think the opportunity is huge for us to kind of restructure our communities, our ways of living and working, so that we're more in harmony with each other and with nature. Would be bloody
Yeah, and
marvelous.
they're ultimately, I think the thing I'm sort of intrigued by at the moment is how we shift the language and the words we use for we hear a lot about governments talking about infrastructure investments, and it's always seen as like, heavy capital, like HS2 or 27 billion on roads. And I've been ranting a lot about that recently, but between HS2 and 4,000 miles of new roads, that's 140 billion quid's worth of money. Like, do we really believe that we need to go faster between some places now, like 20 minutes, half an hour faster? Do we really believe we need to be getting more people into cars to move around?
Yeah.
Or actually, what might we do to create a different type of infrastructure
With
that
that kind of
actually
money.
regenerates life in real places? And so I think I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's absolutely, it's almost like I sort of see this, visualize what's going on, and it's almost like we need to kind of like, it's how do we hold the most vulnerable and the commons over these coming months, years, so that this sort of crumbling that's going on, so those that are most experiencing the suffering, how do you create systems and infrastructure that holds that and allows people to be safe, right, and at least and secure, and and then how do you build from there? How do you start to build around those and on that kind of thing, versus trying to, again, top down? You've got to build from the bottom up. You've got to build this kind of infrastructure that supports real places, that honors places, you know what I mean, and people in those places, and actually allows them to design this stuff. What's the life, what matters to people, what do they want to actually, what's the future we want?
No, I
Crazy.
totally. And it's so funny because I don't know if I told you this story, but it feels like it's quite a perfect example of it. When we were looking to raise money for Patchwork, or more money for Patchwork, we actually went to speak to a VC. Did I tell you this?
No, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure I
Thanks.
did before.
Tell us.
I'll tell. Well, anyway, your listeners may not have heard, but
Yeah, tell us.
me and Kim, so my partner Kim, we sat at the Tate Modern cafe, and we were speaking to this VC guy, and he said, loved the business, was really interested, da da da, and he said, do you know what we look to identify and cultivate? Two things in the founders that we invest in. And so me and Kim were like, oh my God, what's these two things? Hope we've got these two things. This is really exciting. And he said, fear and greed.
Wow.
And we both, I mean, I just started laughing, and like, it was like a reverse Dragon's Den. I sort of banged my hands on the table, laughed out loud, and said, oh my God, they're my two worst, least motivating emotions. Like, we're all about hope and collaboration. Like, that's literally what Patchwork is. Like, we're not fearful and we're not greedy, and that's not going to work for us. Like, no thank you.
Wow.
I mean, he wasn't putting 5 million quid on the table, but we just
Yeah.
immediately was like, okay, that's not us. But what is so interesting is that sums up to me exactly the model, not just the VC model, but the whole sort of capitalist panic model that has set us into the spiral that is meaning we are literally burning up the very planet that we live on, like setting our own house
And
on
ourselves.
fire. Yeah,
And
and
ourselves.
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's because we're fueled by fear and greed, and the companies that are promoting either the acceleration, or at the very least the maintaining of the things
Yeah.
that are causing the problems, is because it's short term fear and greed, fear and greed. And I think you're absolutely right. If we can shift that round and go, do you know what we need? More hope and more collaboration. Let's look at what we want to see. Let's build the world we want to live in, not be defending ourselves against the change that we fear are coming. Let's actually, be proactive and positive, and find new solutions rather than being defensive, I guess. And I think, yeah, it struck me that I just said to this guy, like, it's not just what's wrong with the VC model, it's what's wrong with the whole world. That's why we're in this mess, fear and greed, man. Let's stop with that. I mean, yeah.
Wow. That's quite, it's when you're hearing that from the folks sort of involved in driving the machines, it's quite
Yeah, but it makes sense. So
it does make sense. It does make sense.
less of that, hope and collaboration all the
Less
way.
than that. Yeah, and exactly. And I think there's one of the things that makes me think as well on all of this is that it's kind of like you see it playing out politically right now. We always see it playing out, but again, it's this, and I don't know if maybe it's just there's too many men around. I wonder what would different if we had more women that were speaking for the country. But I do get, there's this real inability. It's a fear of being seen not to know, or
Oh God,
to go, I don't,
yeah,
and so
not
the
sure.
whole, for me, like this not knowing is also really key for change, like,
Yeah.
because we can't know. If we want to know what everything we're thinking of here, if we have to have certainty, or we want to know that everything's, we're never going to move anywhere, because it's the not knowing which allows us to sort of move into kind of, imagination and possibility.
Yeah.
And do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And so
no,
what this
totally.
whole, for me again, this whole culture of knowing, of knowledge, of a sort of head-based logic where you know the answers, and and you'll be seen to be known. And if you don't know, then you're weak or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah,
You know what I
yeah,
mean? But
yeah.
whereas it feels to me that what's being called for more and more is an ability to, an openness to say, we don't know. We're going to try this based on this, and we've asked everyone, and we're inviting everyone into this process of discovery. But
Yeah.
how can we know?
Yeah, you're right. And also, if we don't try, the only one thing we do know is we're absolutely fucked.
Yeah,
That,
right.
so yeah. So let's try something different.
I
Yeah.
think on that note, um, so listen, look, thank you for that that little exploration, and I love what you're exploring with all of this work, and I will point people to, in the show notes, to a lot of what we've talked about. Is there anything you would want to share? Anything coming up? Any plans? Anything people can? How can people find the work, or things that people can get involved
Yeah.
with?
No, I mean, that's as you just perfectly articulated. I'm not really sure entirely of the future. What I know
That's
is
true.
we have, made some decisions at Patchwork that make us safe. We've got an amazing community of people. You can find us patchworkit.com, patchworkit.com.
I'll put that in.
Sharing Economy, the trade body that I chair, is actually at the moment got a discount for any startups that want to join during this difficult time, needing additional support. So you can find that Sharing Economy UK. So you can just Google that, but I'll give you the stuff for the show notes.
Yeah.
I will see you on the streets, I'm sure, when we're allowed back out on the streets to continue our activism. I'm really, recognizing and respecting that it's difficult and impossible to get people together in the real world, but I'm also absolutely determined that we do get back and that we do ensure that we come together as people where possible and appropriate to continue to campaign for and, in a carnival sense, celebrate what we have and build a better world together. So I'm sure I will see you again on the next big demo that we find ourselves at.
Absolutely.
But no, it's been lovely chatting to you. Thank you for having me on.
No, thank you, Liv, for what you do, and thanks for the time. I always ask this little question at the end, because sort of basing this whole inquiry around the work of the concept of the spaceship Earth, and I like this phrase "becoming crew."
I
wonder whether what that makes what that says to you right now, becoming crew.
Oh my God, I love it. And I just love the name of this podcast. I love everything that you're doing. And becoming crew you've nailed it. It means taking personal and collective responsibility and getting on board this spaceship, which is our planet. We don't need to look any further. We don't need to go out there. This is it, the most beautiful place in the universe. We're here. Let's keep it. Please. I'm definitely very happy to be part of the crew. So thanks for having me on board.
Oh, thanks, Liv. It's been great to catch up and really lovely. And we'll be in touch for sure, and keep on keeping on with all the awesomeness.
Yeah, you too. Take care. Love to the family.
All right, Liv.
And love to all
likewise.
your listeners. Thanks for having me. Take care.
Brilliant.
Bye.
Cheers, Liv. Bye. So I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Olivia Knight, and I certainly did. I think Liv's vision of a different way of communities showing up, of sharing, of gifting, of supporting each other, of connecting with each other, the diversity the organicness that we could bring back into the places that we lived is who doesn't want that? And do check out Liv's work, do follow what she's up to, and can we bring this sharing economy on, and particularly this, not just with the stuff we buy and use and consume, but of our relationships. How could we bring more of that on into the places we live? It feels like there's such a moment for building on all this brilliant stuff. So if you like what you're hearing on this podcast, please do share it, or give us a rating or a review or a like on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Acast or whatever you listen on. It's it really helps just other people find it, and it's lovely to get a bit of feedback knowing that that you're finding this useful stuff. If you want to get in touch, drop us a line, dan@thespaceship.earth, or you can find us on Instagram, thespaceship.earth. If you want to check in to a monthly-ish sort of newsletter that I'm trying to get out, if you go to the site, thespaceship.earth, you can sign up there. There's also some merch. If you want some nice teas, an Earthling tea, or other various things that we've cooked up, all helps to keep the show going. So do get in touch, or shout out, or share, whatever you can. It's all much appreciated. So during the lockdown, I did this little experimental series, Reflections from the Great Pause, and I started finishing the episodes with a tune, which I was a semi-pro DJ for many years. I still DJ a bit. I love my music, and I thought, it's really nice ending with a tune. And I completely forgot, as I sort of got back into getting these episodes out again, as my neck has been recovering from a slip disc. I chucked the one out last episode with Tim, and I forgot about this, putting a tune on the end. So I'm going to get back into that, sort of closing the episode with a tune. And so this one, I'm going to close with a bit of an old classic. This is a tune which I absolutely love. There's something in it which, just for me, there's an energy and an emotion and a feeling which is just, I don't know, kind of makes me feel. It's just the kind of feeling that I sort of crave, actually, through sound. So it was recorded in 2001, 19 years ago. It's a band called Röyksopp. Some of you old folks like me will remember it. It was off this brilliant album called Melody AM, and it's called In Space. So I'll leave you with that. Until next time, folks, thanks for tuning in. Take it easy out there. Remember, there are no passengers on Spaceship Earth. We're all crew. Until next time, peace and out.